I keep thinking about the pictures. The smiling ones, the sunlit ones, carefully framed moments that told us everything was fine. Gabby Petito stood barefoot in red rock deserts and pine forests, her blonde hair catching the light just right, her smile effortless, almost weightless. The captions spoke of freedom, of love, of a life unburdened by clocks or cubicles. A white van, open roads, a dream sold to millions scrolling through their phones late at night, wondering what it would feel like to disappear into something beautiful. What we didn't see was the silence between the photos. What we didn't hear were the conversations that ended too quickly. The tension never made it into a caption. The moments when the camera turned off and the reality turned darker. This is not a story about van life. This is a story about what hides behind the lens. When Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie set out on their cross-country road trip in the summer of 2021, they looked like countless other young couples chasing the same idea: escape the ordinary, document the journey, build something meaningful together. Also, Gabby was 22. She was creative, soft-spoken, visibly excited about the future she believed she was building. Brian was older, more reserved, often the one behind the camera, less often in front of it. From the outside, they were engaged, in love, planning a life. From the inside, something was already shifting. Their journey moved west, state by state, national park by national park. Instagram showed curated joy sunsets, laughter, handwritten affirmations on the van walls. But even then, subtle fractures appeared. A post deleted, a caption edited, a tone that felt forced, as if happiness were being performed instead of lived. And then in Moab, Utah, the illusion cracked wide open. On August 12, 2021, police responded to a call. A witness had seen a couple arguing, a woman crying, a man slapping her. What followed would later be watched by millions. Body cam footage shows Gabby sitting on a curb, knees pulled close, her face streaked with tears. She apologizes, over and over. She blames herself, says she has anxiety, says she's mean sometimes. Her voice shakes, not with anger but fear. Brian stands nearby, calm, controlled, almost detached. It's a dynamic. Experts recognize immediately. One person shrinking, the other expanding, not through volume but through certainty. The officers do not arrest anyone that day. They separate the couple for the night. Gabby stays with the van. Brian is given a hotel room. And then shockingly, they are allowed to continue their trip. When I watch that footage now, knowing how this story ends, it's impossible not to feel the weight of what wasn't understood in that moment. Not by the officers, not by the public, not even, perhaps, by Gabby herself. Because victims don't always look like victims. Sometimes they look like they're apologizing for surviving. After Moab, the road continues. Wyoming, Montana, wide open spaces that swallow sound. Text messages still come through, but something about them feels off, shorter, less personal. One message mentions Stan Gabby's grandfather by the wrong name. Her mother notices. A quiet alarm begins to ring. Then suddenly the messages stop. Days pass. Then more days. Gabby's family reaches out, calls, texts, nothing. On September 1st, 2021, Brian Laundrie returns to Florida. Alone. He drives Gabby's van back to his parents' home. He says nothing. He answers no questions. He hires a lawyer. And Gabby Petito is still missing. By the time her disappearance is reported, the nation is watching. News anchors repeat her name. Her photos fill screens. Social media transforms into a digital search party. Every post is dissected, every frame analyzed. Somewhere in that noise, strangers begin to notice something critical. A YouTube video, a van, parked, exactly where it shouldn't have been. The search narrows. On September 19th, in Wyoming's Bridger-Teton National Forest, Gabby Petito is found. The announcement is brief, factual, heavy. She's gone. The cause of death will later be ruled a homicide. There is no spectacle, no dramatic reveal, just the devastating finality of a young woman whose life ended far from home in a place meant for peace. Brian Laundrie disappears soon after. Weeks later, his remains are found in Florida, alongside them a notebook. In it, he admits to killing Gabby. No excuses offered that change the truth, no words that bring her back. Just the confirmation of what so many already feared. When I think about justice in this case, it doesn't feel clean or complete. But I think about the people who refused to let Gabby disappear quietly. The strangers who paused a video. The family who never stopped asking questions. The awareness this case forced into the national conversation about control, about warning signs, about how easily abuse hides behind love. Gabby Petito's story matters because it isn't rare. It matters because silence is often mistaken for peace. And it matters because somewhere, right now, someone is posting a smiling photo hoping no one notices what's happening just outside the frame. The search and the pressure. By the time Gabby Petito's name reached every corner of the country, the silence had already done its damage. It's strange how quiet can become loud, how unanswered messages begin to echo, how a missing voice turns into a kind of static that fills every room. For Gabby's family, that silence wasn't just worrying, it was wrong. They knew her rhythms, they knew her excitement. They knew that even on her busiest days, she never vanished without a word. So when days passed with nothing, no calls, no reassurance, the fear settled in like a weight in the chest. On September 11, 2021, Gabby Petito was officially reported missing. By then, Brian Laundrie had been home in Florida for 10 days. He had driven the van back alone, parked it, gone inside, refused to speak. His parents said nothing. Their lawyer said even less, and in the absence of answers, suspicion filled the vacuum. I remember how fast the story accelerated once the public got involved. This wasn't a slow burn anymore. It was a wildfire. News vans lined the street outside the Laundrie home. Cameras pointed at closed doors. Reporters asked questions into the air, hoping anyone would respond. Online, Gabby's photos were reshared millions of times. Her smile became a symbol, her face a plea. And then something unusual happened. The internet began to search. Not recklessly, not randomly, but methodically. People with no badge and no obligation started reviewing footage, retracing routes, scanning backgrounds. They watched travel vlogs frame by frame. They compared timestamps. They mapped roads. One video changed everything. A couple documenting their own van life journey had unknowingly recorded Gabby's van parked near Spread Creek in Wyoming. It sat there quietly, half hidden, exactly where investigators would later focus their search. A detail missed in real time, now impossible to ignore. The crowd-sourced effort didn't solve the case, but it did something powerful. It narrowed the silence. It turned chaos into direction. Meanwhile, pressure mounted on Brian Laundrie. Law enforcement named him a person of interest. Not a suspect yet, but the distinction did little to quiet the public. Why wouldn't he talk? Why wouldn't his family help? Why did he come home alone? Those questions followed him everywhere. Or at least they would have if he hadn't vanished. On September 14th, Brian Laundrie was reported missing by his parents. They said he'd gone hiking in a nearby nature reserve. Days passed, then more. Search teams flooded the area. Dogs tracked scents. Helicopters circled overhead. Nothing. It was as if he had dissolved into the landscape. As investigators searched 2 states at once, Wyoming for Gabby, Florida for Brian, the story became something larger than a missing persons case. It became a national reckoning. Conversations shifted. Experts weighed in. Survivors spoke up. People began to recognize patterns they'd seen before. The apologizing victim, the calm partner, the public smile hiding private fear. And while the media attention was intense, sometimes overwhelming, it also kept the case alive. It kept Gabby's name from slipping into obscurity. It kept the pressure on law enforcement. It made forgetting impossible. When Gabby's remains were found, the search didn't end. It changed. The focus turned fully to Brian Laundrie, to where he had gone, to what he had done, and to what he had left behind. Weeks later, in October, the Florida search finally reached its quiet conclusion. Among them was a notebook. Brian's remains were discovered in a remote area of the reserve, along with personal belongings. Inside were words no one wanted to read but needed to understand. A confession. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a confirmation of loss written too late to matter. As part 2 closes, the truth is beginning to surface, but justice still feels incomplete. Gabby has been found, but the questions remain heavy, and the story is no longer just about what happened in the wilderness. It's about what went unnoticed long before the road trip ever began. The discovery and the truth. By the time Gabby Petito was found, the country already knew the ending it feared. But knowing is not the same as accepting. The announcement came quietly, the way devastating news often does, measured words, carefully chosen. Authorities confirmed that human remains discovered in Wyoming's Bridger-Teton National Forest were Gabby's. The place itself was starkly beautiful, open land, long shadows, the kind of landscape that feels eternal. It was the last place she had been seen, and now it was the place where her journey stopped. There was no spectacle in the revelation. No dramatic press conference, just a heavy finality that settled across the nation. Gabby Petito was gone. The medical examiner would later rule her death a homicide caused by manual strangulation. The words were clinical, stripped of emotion, but their meaning cut deeply. This was not an accident, not a mystery illness, not a tragic misstep in the wilderness. It was violence. I remember how the tone shifted after that. The conversation grew quieter, less speculative, more sober. The smiling photos that once felt aspirational now felt heartbreaking. Every image carried a question no one could answer anymore. Did she know this would be the end? Investigators reconstructed the final days as carefully as possible. Locations, timelines, digital breadcrumbs, text messages sent when Gabby was no longer able to send them herself. A trail that pointed not toward confusion but toward control. Still, much of what happened in those final moments would remain unknowable. There were no witnesses, no dramatic chase, no final phone call captured on tape. Just silence. As the case progressed, attention returned again and again to the Moab police stop. The footage was replayed, dissected, slowed down. Experts weighed in. Advocates spoke up. What once looked like a routine domestic call now appeared painfully familiar to those trained to see abuse for what it is. Gabby apologizing. Gabby crying. Gabby taking responsibility for emotional distress that was never hers to carry. This wasn't hindsight rewriting the story. It was clarity finally arriving. The truth wasn't hidden in shadows. It had been recorded in broad daylight. We just didn't know how to read it yet. Meanwhile, Brian Laundrie remained missing. His absence became its own kind of presence. Every day without answers intensified the frustration, especially for Gabby's family. Justice felt suspended, incomplete, a chapter missing its ending. Then, weeks later, the Florida search reached a conclusion no one celebrated. Brian Laundrie's remains were found in a nature reserve not far from his parents' home. Alongside them were personal items and a notebook. Inside that notebook was what law enforcement would later describe as a confession. Not a detailed narrative, not a justification that held weight, just an admission of responsibility. An acknowledgement of what had been done, written after it was too late to matter. For some, it felt like closure. For others, it felt like theft of accountability, of answers, of the chance to confront the truth in a courtroom. Justice, in the traditional sense, would never come. But truth had arrived. And truth has its own gravity. As the legal chapter closed, another opened, and Gabby Petito's name no longer belonged only to a case file or a headline. It became a reference point, a lesson, a warning. Training programs changed, conversations shifted, people revisited their own experiences and recognized patterns they had once dismissed. Control doesn't always announce itself loudly. Danger doesn't always look dramatic, and victims don't always know they're victims. In the final part of this story, the focus turns forward not to relive the tragedy, but to understand its legacy. What was learned, what was missed, and how Gabby Petito's life, even in its ending, forced the world to look more closely at what love should never look like. The reckoning and the legacy. There are cases that end with a verdict. This one ended with understanding. By the time Brian Laundrie's notebook was made public, the story had already taken its final shape. The confession did not reveal new twists or hidden masterminds. It didn't rewrite the timeline or soften the outcome. What it did, quietly, definitively, was remove the last veil of doubt. Gabby Petito had been killed by the person she trusted most. And with that truth, the case closed, not with a gavel but with a weight that settled into the national conscience. I think about how justice is usually portrayed in true crime arrests, trials, sentences, a clear line from crime to consequence. But justice doesn't always arrive dressed like that. Sometimes it comes as recognition. Sometimes it comes as prevention. Sometimes it comes too late for one person, but in time for others. Brian Laundrie's death ended the legal pursuit, but it did not end the conversation. In many ways, it finally allowed it to begin honestly. Because once the noise faded, once the cameras left and the headlines moved on, what remained was a simple, uncomfortable truth. The warning signs were there. Not hidden, not subtle, just misunderstood. The Moab footage became a turning point in training rooms across the country. Law enforcement agencies revisited protocols. Advocates used the video to teach what coercive control can look like when it doesn't leave visible bruises. Survivors watched and saw themselves not weak, not foolish, but human. Gabby's family refused to let her name be reduced to a case number. They spoke, they advocated, they transformed grief into purpose. Through foundations and awareness campaigns, they turned loss into language people could finally understand. And then there were the quiet heroes. The strangers who paused a YouTube video and noticed a van in the background. The viewers who shared Gabby's face until it became impossible to ignore. The investigators who followed the evidence without spectacle. The advocates who said again and again, this is what danger can look like. None of them saved Gabby. But together, they changed what happens next. That is the moral resolution of this story. Not revenge, not punishment, but recognition. The exposure of a truth that had long been minimized. The dismantling of a myth that love is supposed to hurt. The understanding that silence is not peace and control is not care. When I think of Gabby Petito now, I don't think first of the ending. I think of the beginning, of a young woman who wanted to create something beautiful, who believed in adventure, who trusted the wrong person not because she was naive, but because she was human. Her story still matters because it asks something of us. To listen more closely, to take fear seriously even when it whispers, to understand that the most dangerous moments don't always look dramatic, and to step in before silence becomes permanent. This case did not end with a trial, but it did end with truth. And sometimes, truth is the only justice we're given. If even one person recognizes the signs sooner because of Gabby Petito's story, if one voice speaks up earlier, if one moment of control is named for what it is, then her life continues to matter far beyond the road. She never finished traveling. This is not just a true crime story. It is a warning. It is a lesson. And it is a tribute to a young woman whose voice was taken, but whose story refuses to be forgotten. She wanted freedom. The internet saw perfection. What the camera missed, the Gabby Petito case takes viewers beyond the headlines into the quiet moments that told a very different story. From a cross-country van life journey that looked like a dream to a police encounter that raised red flags no one fully understood at the time, This documentary retraces the final weeks of Gabby Petito's life with care, clarity, and restraint. As communication suddenly stops and fear begins to grow, the story unfolds into a nationwide search powered not just by law enforcement, but by millions of strangers who refused to look away. A single overlooked detail, hidden in plain sight, shifts everything. This is not a story about spectacle. It's about silence, control, and the warning signs we often miss. Told in a somber, first-person investigative voice, this revisit honors Gabby Petito's life while confronting the uncomfortable truths her case revealed. This isn't just true crime. It's a warning and a lesson that still matters today. Thanks for your time you always spend to watch our videos. We greatly value your support, so please share this video with your loved ones. Do us a favor and subscribe right away, regardless of where you are watching.